Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining in on a Friday afternoon. It's a Friday of our winter 2.0. I hope you're enjoying the snow or the snow that you woke up to. But I do appreciate it. I want to get right into it because it's going to be a full session, and I want to give our speakers as much time as possible and an opportunity for question and answers. So a little bit, I'm sharing that this is the agenda. And for those that are new to this is the Spokane Commercial Property Council. We've been really working hard for about the last 15 months. The purpose of this group has been to act much like a neighborhood council. And the goal or mission of the neighborhood councils are to assist city agencies in determining priority needs. That was how it originated, and we've spent the year working. Things have morphed and evolved into some other projects along the way that I'll update you in a little bit. Currently, we're about 950 on Facebook. There's 450 on an email distribution list, and we get considerable amount of media inquiries. And so I think today we have Krem on the Zoom, as well as the spokesman, and I believe KHQ is trying to come on as well. And really our purpose is from what we've learned from research is then in education is advocacy. And that's what we're doing here today, is not only learning from our two local legislators, but also sharing maybe some of our concerns of what we're seeing as it relates strictly to law enforcement. So what's been happening? So the Spokane Mayor Woodward has drafted a homeless plan. I believe it should be dropped in public by the end of this month. And I'm excited about it. I have the opportunity to serve on our advisory council, and I think it's a great start, and it's going to allow us an opportunity to sing from the same song sheet. Another one, if you haven't checked it out, is Hello for Good. It's an organization that is really about community solutions, and they've been working hard with a lot of research, did a gap analysis on the homeless services, and continue to do more research and advocate for special needs in the community to address the challenges that we're facing. And then if you're not on the Facebook page, I know that link is long, but we do have a Facebook page. It's under the Spokane Business and Commercial Property Council. And then another page that's been really active and more towards public safety and law enforcement is Back the Blue 509. So I'd encourage you to check it out as well. Next month, we'll have Chief Meidel will be on. That's May 6th. It's another Friday. Hopefully, we won't be going through Winter 2.0 still at that point. But we will have that. I will send out notification as we get closer to that. And really, the whole goal of this is a call to action when there's items to be called upon. It's our time as citizens to educate, advocate, and hopefully communicate for good policy. So with that, I'm going to stop share real quick. Let me go back, new share. No, that's not what I want. Sorry about that. I thought I had that. Let me see, I will stop share. I apologize. Technology, we should be Zoom proficient, and I am not there yet. Okay, there we go. All right. Jesse, can you see that? Yeah. Okay. So what I have here, this is just what I want to do is do a quick flyby on statistics that have been shared with me by both the Spokane County Sheriff's Office as well as Spokane Police Department, and just to give you a flyby as we go through, because this is important information, I think, especially as what we're coming off of just in the last couple of weeks. So these are some headlines that have appeared just since the 1st of April. 2 dead, 1 wounded in drive-by shooting in downtown Spokane. Court documents, victim in Red Top Motel shooting was shot in head during drive-by. Spokane designated by federal law enforcement as a crisis spot for fentanyl addiction after seizures increased 1,100%. 6-time convicted felon arrested after fleeing from police and throwing a gun onto I-90. Witnesses detail the horrific aftermath of a drive-by shooting in downtown Spokane that left 2 critically injured. and 2 unrelated shootings in less than an hour. Finally, these, and there's more obviously, but these are some of the ones I grabbed. Spokane man who's been arrested more than 225 times faces new challenges. So looking at the statistics, SCSO is Spokane County Sheriff's Office. This is really a reflection on in the county in regards to property crime. You can see the 5-year trend line does trend down, but what we're looking at right here, where the cursor is at, is what's happened since in 2021. Halfway through the year is when the new law enforcement reform legislation went into law, and where we've seen what I sense is some implications, but I'm looking forward to our presentation to hear more about that. You can see there was a spike in property crime, the same in violent crime. And this has been a big one because this is what we're seeing in the headlines now with some of these shootings and a lot of the violent crime. And you can see once again the spike, and it's going past that in this one in the county, the 5-year trend is going up. And so this one went up past the 5-year trend. And then the interesting one, we're going to be talking about drug decriminalization. In 2021, we had the Blake decision. Legislature voted to decriminalize illegal drugs. And at that point, this isn't the fact that drugs are going down, drug use is going down. This is the fact that they just aren't able to arrest those with that are possessing drugs. So there was only, nominal amount. This is Washington state data. And between 2020 and July 2021, auto thefts increased 25%. Since July 21, auto thefts have increased 93%. That's statewide. And then let's get a little bit more on the micro level, looking at Spokane Police Department data. This is citywide, so it's all of the city. This one reflects violent crime and property crime. And you can see once again, the trend, the 5-year trend does go down, but you can see what happened. And this is reflective through 2022, March 31st, 2022, where it has spiked back up over the 5-year trend line. And then the same thing with property crime. And then we're looking at burglary residents. So that's, residential. Once again, that trend is going down pretty steeply. And it's holding true. I don't know if residential crime has seen as big as impact as we're seeing commercial and downtown. But burglary commercial, that trend line is the only trend line in the city, that 5-year trend line on any of the crimes that is going up. But you can see the spike that we're seeing in 2022. And then we see vehicle theft and larceny. Vehicle theft is really taken an increase since the middle of 2021. 5-year trend is down, but we're well above over the last 8 months. And then this is vehicle prowlings. This is a map reflecting where the vehicle prowlings that were reported in just March of 2022. The bottom part's a bar graph that reflects the orange is 2022, the lighter blue is 2021, and then the darker shade is 2020. And you can see the spike in vehicle prowlings. This is what we're reading in the newspaper every day, and then they're the smash and grabs. So then I think as we look at the drug piece of it, and what is a concern here, this is 2020. The medical examiner has not reported or published the 2021 numbers yet, but the concern here, if you can see it, oops, let me go backwards, sorry, is in 2019, 72 of the accidental deaths were related to drugs, 72 of the 290. We had a 50% increase in 2020, so we went to 108. And we see the high percentage there. One of the interesting statistics on that from the Spokane County Sheriff's Office is that that until 2021, domestic violence homicides were by far and away the leading source of Spokane County homicides. In 2021, they do have this number, 40% of the homicides were drug related, which is now ahead of domestic violence. And then 2 final things I just want to share, and this has to do with one of the bills that didn't make it out this year, and that's Senate Bill 5919, and that's the pursuit bill. This first example, I think we all know, is the Red Top Motel drive-by shooting, where public safety was jeopardized because of the pursuit bill. And what the pursuit bill wanted to do is change the threshold from reasonable suspicion to probable cause. So because the sheriff's department didn't have reasonable cause, the shooter, in this case, Joshua Seth, was a threat to society for an additional 6 days. The sheriff's office did not have probable cause to pursue Seth. They were seeking a search warrant on Seth's vehicle, which was involved in the shooting, and they had his house surrounded. Seth came walking out with a long rifle, but because they only had reasonable suspicion, they couldn't pursue. When Seth got in his vehicle, he threw his weapon out of the car while driving away. The weapon that Spokane County Sheriff's Office believes was used in the drive-by shooting was stashed at another house. Ultimately, it was 6 days until they received approval of the warrant and then arrested him on probable cause, which puts the community at risk for those 6 days that they were not able to arrest him. And the suspect had opportunity to destroy the evidence. The final one, this happened in December 2021. It was a Bigelow Gulch deputy shooting. There was a fatality in this. Spokane County Sheriff's Office had reasonable suspicion to pull over Michael Lee in December 2021 because they did not have reasonable cause. The suspect sped off and eventually broke into a home, stole guns, and eventually ambushed 2 deputies that were responding to the break-in. Eventually, a deputy shot and killed Lee. With reasonable suspicion, the county's sheriff's office feels that with a threshold of reasonable suspicion that Lee would most likely still be alive because that ambush would not have happened. So I will go back. Now, what I want to we'll go into is our presentation. And first up, we're going to have Senator Billig. And I want to share, because I want to give him kudos for being here. He spoke with us last September when Sheriff Ozzie was on as well. And the intention of that was to talk about the legislative session of 2021 and law enforcement reforms. But a little bit about Andy before I turn it over to Andy is he's a proud father, business person, and member of the Spokane community. He previously served a term in the House of Representatives. He then was elected to the state Senate by the constituents of the 3rd Legislative District in 2012 and was re-elected in 2016. He was elected Majority Leader by Senate Democrats in 2018. So without any further ado, Senator Billig, all yours.
Great. Thanks, Judd. Nice to see everybody. Very glad to be with you today. So I have a short presentation, and then I know Representative Graham is going to talk as well, and then really looking forward to your questions and dialogue, and appreciate appearing with Representative Graham as well. Hi there. Judd, can I share my screen? Will that work?
Yes, you can. I think you should be set.
Great. Can you see that presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so the first, Judd asked to talk mostly about law enforcement legislation, and also want to touch on the Blake decision. And so I've got those slides, but I have the first few slides are just sort of the general session recap, which I'm just going to fly through, but just in maybe take 1 or 2 minutes as I fly through those. But just so you know some of the other things that happen, because they are actually all connected to the things we're talking about, a lot of housing and mental health treatment. And then during the Q&A session, if you want me to go back to anything to talk in any more detail, then just let me know. So just bear with me for a moment. We'll get to the law enforcement stuff. Just some of the key issues that we worked on in the 2022 legislative session. A couple of the highlights: it was the 5th year in a row that we finished on time. The first time that's happened since 1899, so we're really proud about that. 94% of all the legislation that was passed was bipartisan. We did tax cuts for small businesses, big investments for Washington students, and then $1.2 billion investments in housing and homelessness. And that I think really is, I know in talking with Chud and seeing some of the work that this group has done, that housing and homelessness work is some of the big, is a priority. So I'm just not going to really talk about each one of these, but just you can see some of the things that we did in housing. And again, glad to come back and talk more about these. education, same thing. Some big investments specifically for Spokane, and then generally really looking at student mental health as well, with the increase in the school nurses and counselors and school psychologists. Behavioral health and healthcare, again, sort of indirectly related to some of the issues that you talk about. But one of the big community asks related to mental health was the Northeast Spokane Behavioral Health Center. This is a real community collaboration, and the community wanted support for that. So the legislature came through with $700,000 to help with that. Eastern Washington University, 60 new nursing slots, and the establishment of a bachelor's of nursing program was really big. And I'm just going to scroll through the last few of those. Transportation, I won't spend time on, but we passed a big transportation package. One of the highlights was a 2-year acceleration in the construction of the North Spokane corridor. This is 5 years in the work to pass transportation package. A lot of small business and economic development, unemployment tax relief, the film and television incentive, which is really important for Spokane, and manufacturing tax incentive as well.
Andy, okay. Sorry to interrupt. The slides aren't progressing on our end.
Oh, you're not seeing the slides?
Yeah, apologize.
What do you have on the screen?
I have your cover.
Huh. Let me get out of that. Just try again.
There you go. Did
it progress? Is it still just the cover?
We're on Spokane highlights now.
Okay. Well, that's not what's on my screen, so let me go ahead to that one. Okay, the next one. So is it Spokane highlights now?
Yep.
Okay, now it should be law enforcement requested priorities.
Just
no. Okay. No. Well, I'll just keep going and we'll go catch up here.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just do it. See if I can do it manually. How about now?
Yes, we can see law enforcement now.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's go to law enforcement then. So going into the session, obviously, and this is where I'm going to slow down and go into a little bit more detail, because this is, I think, really what Chet had asked that I focus on. And I appreciate all the dialogue I've had with a lot of you on all of these issues. But coming into the session related to law enforcement, there were really 6 priorities that I heard about the most. We ended up passing 5 of these priorities. So let's go ahead and. So do you see the bullet points, Chad?
Yes, like investigatory.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Good. So the first one was investigatory stops, and this is probably the #1 priority I heard about the most from local law enforcement and the statewide advocates. So and this passed in House Bill 2037, and this is basically that when law enforcement come upon a scene, called to a scene, they need to establish probable cause, but in that few minutes, sometimes it's even as short as a couple of minutes to establish probable cause. Somebody who appears to be the culprit could run away, and so this allows the police to detain somebody at the scene for while they do that investigation. And this was something that was passed with strong bipartisan support. The second one was related to law enforcement being able to detain people for mental health detentions and then transporting them to an emergency room or to wherever they may be going. This was, I think, a clarification. There were some differences of opinions of whether this was allowed under the original legislation, and I think was really a good thing to pass and clarify. So we got that one passed. Allowing the use of shotguns and beanbag guns is passed in House Bill 1719. This was actually just a mistake that was done in those original bills. And I should pause here and just remind people, the original bills were a suite of about 12 bills that went to building trust between community and law enforcement, went to accountability and transparency. And most of those bills were implemented without a problem, but these were the ones where we needed to have follow-up. And, the goals, the two most important things out of the law enforcement bills that we passed, in my mind, were the independent investigations when there's a significant police use of force. That's something that Spokane, the city of Spokane, constituents of Spokane have always expressed strong support for. And the other big one was the de-escalation requirements. And that's something that law enforcement throughout the state, but particularly in Spokane, we're moving towards anyway. Those both are still in effect and did not really have requests for any significant changes. So these were the ones that had changes, were those top three. Another one that wasn't directly related to the accountability bills, but was a high priority from law enforcement, was to increase the pension benefits for police and fire. This passed in House Bill 1701. And so you think about funding of law enforcement, this was a major step forward in funding for law enforcement. The next one was to increase funding for additional BLEA classes. These are the basic law enforcement academy classes. So it's more training capacity, and we were able to put that into the budget. I will note that there's an effort to get more of these classes in Spokane, and actually working right now with Chief Vital and the CJTC to see if we can possibly get more of these classes in Spokane. There's a number of concerns with that, or not concerns, challenges. The sixth priority, which did not pass, was Senate Bill 5919. And I just want to clarify, pursuits are allowed right now. And so what this legislation goes to is pursuits when there's excessive speed or running red lights or other where a police officer will not be following the traffic laws to pursue somebody. And those high speed pursuits actually also in some cases are allowed right now, even under the legislation that was passed last year. So it's allowed in the case of a DUI, and it's allowed in the case of certain violent crimes. And Senate Bill 5919 would have expanded in some of those cases to allow for more pursuits. And the case that you said, Judd, I would need more information, but even under 5919, it would only be for violent crimes. And so that person would have had to have committed a crime. Simply walking out with a gun and trying to serve a warrant, probably even under 5919 wouldn't have been cause for pursuit, but I don't have all the information of that. So just, 5919 wouldn't have opened it up completely, but it wasn't opened up completely even beforehand. I mean, one of the things I learned in talking with Chief Meidel is that even if 5919 had passed, it wouldn't have changed dramatically when Spokane police do pursuits, because even the Spokane policy on pursuits before any of these bills passed didn't allow for pursuits in a lot of these situations, because pursuits are really dangerous, and law enforcement recognizes that. It's dangerous for law enforcement officers. It's dangerous for bystanders. So in many, especially urban city police departments, had not been doing many pursuits, but he still wanted it to pass. And the reason he wanted it to pass is because he said, even if it didn't change dramatically when we pursue, it will change the perception that we can pursue. And so that it will help to stop people from fleeing. And that's quite frankly why I supported the bill. So I voted for this bill when it first came through the Senate and had this pursuit language in it. It did not have the support to get to the floor of the Senate when it came back the second time from the House, when it had only the pursuit language. So I did not get an opportunity to vote on it the second time. And I'm glad to go into the sort of legislative details of how that happens. Judd, working for Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers, I think you know about sort of those structures within the caucuses about how bills come up for a vote, and glad to explain that. We actually have a much lower standard than I think the federal caucuses have. The Hastert rule, we're a little bit easier to get a bill to the floor than the Hastert rule. So glad to talk more about that. And then the other public safety, on the next slide, if you can see it, a number of other public safety bills I would say were important, but weren't part of sort of that suite of bills that law enforcement had as their top priorities. House Bill 1901, which changed and improved how civil protection orders work. We had a really good bipartisan bill, House Bill 1815, about catalytic converter theft to make have more accountability and try to reduce catalytic converter threats. House Bill 1785, which helped to make the state patrol salaries more competitive. And if you remember, state patrol is really the only police officers that directly work for the state. And so we want to make sure their salaries were competitive. And then $8 million for grants to local law enforcement agencies to support officer health and wellness. Here are some other charts. And can you see these charts, Chud? Okay. So this is the same data that Chud had. This is all from the Spokane Police Department. And you can see on the left, this is the first 3 months of the year for 2022 compared to the first 3 months of all of the years going back to 2017. So the slide on the left is for the whole city. You can see definitely an increase in property crime. And if you look at the downtown precinct, you can see a dramatic increase. I mean, there's no question there is a dramatic increase in property crime downtown. If you look at the next slide, you can see this is the full year. So the last slides were the first 3 months. This is the full year. You can see property crime for the whole city and violent crime flat. But then again, the downtown precinct, just very significant uptick in property crimes. Okay, the last thing that I'll touch on before I hand it over to Representative Graham is the Blake decision. So the Blake decision was a Supreme Court case that actually came out of Spokane County. And in February, late February of 21, the court basically invalidated all of the state's drug possession laws. I want to be really clear. It's still a felony to deal drugs, to distribute drugs, to manufacture drugs, but they invalidated all of the drug possession laws for small amounts of drugs. So in the middle of the session, I mean, this is a big policy. We would normally take a long time to get input and do stakeholder work and spend a year trying to get it right. But in a short amount of time, we needed to come up with a solution. So a bipartisan group of legislators passed Senate Bill 5478 to address the ruling. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the version that I wanted. There was a version that came out of the Senate that I much prefer. That was one that we passed with even number of Republicans and Democrats. The version that came back from the House, which also was very bipartisan in the House. So you sort of had this bipartisan group working in the Senate with one idea, bipartisan group working in the House came up with another idea. That idea came back. It was better in some ways, that it had some funding attached to it. I thought it was worse in other ways. But again, we were under this very tight time constraint and ended up with this as a solution. But we all knew it wasn't exactly, it may not be the right exact solution. So we put a 2-year sunset on it and set up a pretty in-depth task force to come up with recommendations to the 2023 legislature. That task force is the Substance Use Recovery Services Advisory Committee. They meet now monthly. Their information is on the HCA website, and I encourage people who are interested to go look at their work. They have a public comment period in every meeting. I think their next meeting is May 11th, and it's an opportunity for you to have input. On that committee are bipartisan group of legislators. There's somebody representing law enforcement, somebody representing the prosecutors, the public defenders, a lot of substance use experts. And so hopefully they'll come up with the recommendations then that the legislature can act on. And this is something we do when we had a big court case about education funding. The McCleary court case was that 7-8 years ago. We had a group of 8 legislators that came up with recommendations, spent a year coming up with recommendations. I happened to be one of those 8, so I was very familiar with it because that was my policy area. And so that's a big issue that's coming up. And just with the last slide I have is just talking about what's going forward, some of the things that I think are going to be particularly pertinent in the next legislative session. And I definitely have the Blake solution on there because that is going to be something that's very important and we're going to need to really spend some time on. So I will stop sharing my screen there. Sorry that was so fast, but I wanted to get all the information out and make sure that we left lots of time for questions.
Great, thanks, Senator. I'm going to hold questions and answers until after Representative Jenny Graham. But one question I think that I wasn't aware of on the 5919 that's still alive, would you or would the legislators consider a special session just to address Senate Bill 5919 this spring or summer?
So let me see, is my share stuff there? So the way I mentioned about going into why that bill didn't come to the floor, and I don't know that it would change if we did a special session, but I will, things, anything could happen. So what happens is the legislative caucuses have policies and systems by which bills come to the floor. And as I mentioned, the Hastert rule, the House Republicans in Congress had it where you had to have half of the majority caucus to vote to bring a bill to the floor, to vote yes on a bill for it to come to the floor. When the Senate Republicans were in control of the state Senate, they had something similar. Our level is actually a little bit lower. We don't say that you have to have half of the caucus that has to vote for the bill. We just say you have to have half of the caucus that wants the bill to come to the floor. So when we were talking about that 2037, House Bill 2037 about investigatory stops, I think there were only 10 of us in the Democratic caucus that voted for that bill. But there were a number of people who said, look, I can't vote for that bill in representing my constituents and because of what I believe, but I do believe that it's something that should be on the floor. And so we were able to get that one to the floor, even though we didn't have a majority. So for a special session, I don't know that will change, but certainly open to it. I think there is a version of this bill that would have the support in both chambers to pass. There was a version, there was a House version of the bill. And so I think that one is something that we would certainly look at for next year and would have a better chance, or maybe it's this version of it.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to move over to Representative Jenny Graham. And just a quick introduction of Jenny. She is a former small business owner, a veteran, wife, mother, and victims advocate. She is the survivor of abuse, and her sister was a victim of the Green River Killer. Jenny serves on the following committees: Civil Rights and Judiciary, Public Safety, Rules, and State Government and Tribal Relations. It's all yours, Jenny.
Thank you, Chad. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yes? Okay. Yes. So I want to set the tone for this meeting. First of all, I thank Senator Billig very much for being willing to have this meeting, this conversation that is super important. You've had a lot of charts which I think are really helpful. I'm going to go off of the list that you sent with the original questions that you were asking about. So the state of public safety crime statistic trends, we've talked about that. And it's obviously troubling that, there is definitely data that's out there, but nothing replaces our eyes, our ears, and our own experiences of seeing what is happening in this city that I believe all of us love. So data is okay, but it can be skewed. So I'm just saying that paying attention to what we're actually seeing really does matter. And one of the other things that I would like to point to as I move on with this is there are a lot of issues that we're facing last session, this session, that have to do with
Jenny. Hey Jenny, 1 second. I'm going to have Denny York. Can you are sharing your screen? If you can unshare, please. I apologize. Thank you.
That's okay. I lost my train of thought. So going back into this list, House Bill 1719 authorizes the use of less lethal munitions. I am a member of the Public Safety Committee. And so that means that I've been there. I was there for all of the testimony that we heard. I've been part of all of the meetings. One of the smartest things that we did was we included law enforcement in an advisory group to take a look at these bills and say, because I'm not law enforcement. I absolutely will put on my jeans and tennis shoes and go for ride-alongs. I've done it for the police department, the fire department. It was trying to do this at the hospitals before COVID hit. So hopefully, that'll be able to pick up, because all of those feed into each other when we are looking at policy to address a lot of the issues that we're having. So these particular bills, so 1719, these bills anybody can look up, because all of the committee hearings and floor debates are recorded. So anything that I say, I'm going to stand by, because those recordings exist. And I will tell you that while, it's being said that these were unintended consequences, I'm going to say not so much at this point, because these issues did come up. The lethal munitions came up. Representative Clippert, who is law enforcement, talked about all of these things. And, we were genuinely looking that if you're law enforcement and you're going to face these certain things, what are you going to face as far as being able to do your job? And if for some reason this is going to interfere, how? And what are some possible solutions that you have? Well, maybe we might be able to thread the needle. Because I do believe that whether you are Republican or Democrat or independent, crime does not care, does not ask what political party you belong to. These are our families. These are our businesses. It's our community, where we're living and working and raising our families. So this, in my opinion, is something that should be bringing all of us together. And, how we look at some of these things is important. Last session, part of what we were dealing with when we're talking about use of force was the confusion, lack of definition, and police officers, especially now, that with everything that we're dealing with right now, they need to know what they can do and what they can't do. Anything it is that is gray area is going to create a huge problem, because with the state of things that have happened, if that officer, even though they have gone through specific training, something doesn't go quite right, there is a lot that ends up coming out of that. So it's going to cause any normal person facing that situation to have to, there's they have to go through a lot of things before they can just react in certain situations. And, granted, these laws have made it worse, and they have the new committee that was put together that also decides whether an officer is decertified or not. That's another issue that has come into play, because a lot of the people that are on that committee are not law enforcement. They're not in these positions. They've never had to make these split-second decisions. And honestly, if I were to have my way with this, I believe that every elected official that has to make decisions on these bills should be required to go on ride-alongs, should be required to, understand from that aspect exactly what law enforcement is having to deal with. And you can't necessarily get that from data per se. That's getting in, rolling up your sleeves and doing the hard work that needs to be done. So the 5919, that is one that is super important. We have a member that was Washington State Patrol and also a federal marshal that helped put this bill together, coming from a standpoint of what we've dealt with in the last year and what needed to happen in order to fix these problems. That's where 5919 came from. And I can tell you from the standpoint of the Public Safety Committee, that bill was basically dead on arrival. There was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that was going on in order to get the bill to the floor for the people's representatives to be able to take a vote on that bill. So the process wise, when we're talking about the concurrence voting and it goes from the House to the Senate and back again, we did have obviously the votes for that to happen. And the concurrence part of it actually was less favorable to Republicans, law enforcement, for that concurrence vote. So it's not making a lot of sense why it would have even been brought up to begin with, and it passed, and then yet when it now comes up for concurrence, it's not brought to the floor. And there were a couple of different motions for that to happen. So in the balance, and another really key point that I do want to bring up, and this is also for any reporters that are on the, this meeting, that there is an article in the South Seattle Emerald, and that is regarding Representative Kristen Harris Talley, in which she is absolutely talking about these bills. She's talking about why she's not running again, and the disappointment that she had that they were, and I'm talking about the Democrat caucus, were talking about, and this is her words, that the bill, they considered that to be a bad bill, which I'm going to say is why it didn't end up coming to the floor, is that even though this is a bill that we so desperately needed, because the police need black and white, gray is a problem. This is the bill that the law enforcement wanted. Now, granted, they would settle, for something's better than nothing to a certain point, and we were able to do some good work. This one, though, really did matter. You're living right now. You are living the consequences of bad policy passing, in which there are people that are being injured and they're being killed. And, I know, and again, it's not a political party issue. One of the things that's very near and dear to my heart, as much as we talk about the individuals that are incarcerated, where they talk about disproportionately incarceration, what's missing from the conversation, and is so very important, is the families that are affected, that are in the poor or marginalized communities that we don't talk about. The families that they don't live in gated communities. They can't afford to buy their own security. And without positive and proactive policing, these poor families are the ones that are absolutely, I think, being hurt worse than the majority of a lot of people that have these services available. But they're the ones that are going to be directly in harm's way when we're talking about gangs, when we're talking about the drug traffickers, human traffickers, and and any other crime that we're talking about. They are disproportionately affected by this. And these are not numbers to me. These are real people with real consequences. I mean, I can talk about an example of there was a lady that was walking in a crosswalk downtown, Tiffany. I had a chance to talk to her, and I gave her some time to heal, but she was attacked in that crosswalk and stomped on 5 times, kicked in the head 3 times. That's major consequences for crime victims and their families, who are being treated as second-class citizens in Washington state. She had to now absorb all of those bills. She missed work. And that's providing she could go back to work, because for some people they can't. And there's really not very many resources available for these crime victims. And, in talking to her, and the heartbreaking scenario that happened, that she ended up getting the news that they were not going to be charging the person that did this to her, because they were considered not competent to stand trial, that they went to Eastern State Hospital, where they promptly did the same thing and killed somebody. And then when you're talking to her and she's mentioning that the person that did this had 5 violent felonies before it happened to her, before the person was killed. There are some things that we definitely need to look at when it comes to these policy bills that are coming up. Another thing that's totally germane to what we're talking about is how many drive-by shootings are we having that we didn't see just a few years ago? Not like what we're seeing right now. This is cause and effect. This is bad policy coming into play, and other bills that have to do with the drive-by shooting.
Senator Graham, in order to keep things going, do you mind? I want to take that Senate Bill 5919, because I do believe it was one that was a critical one to pass. And Senator, are you still on? I don't have you on the screen. I wanted to follow up.
Yeah, okay. My
video went out.
Well, no, yeah, my computer's trying to.
Okay, I want to take that bill in particular, and it did. The both versions passed out of the House and the Senate, and the concurrent came forward to you, and it didn't go forward. My understanding of the votes were there, and it didn't go forward on the last day of session. As the majority leader, and you mentioned bipartisan support, as a majority leader, and I sense that you support it. That's, I guess, my reaction as you talked about this legislation is that you'd be supportive. If you support it and you drive it, wouldn't people follow it?
So when things are on the margins, yes, I think the majority leader can nudge it one way or the other. The floor leader, it's the floor leader who actually brings the bill to the floor, but not always. And we work in that capacity of managing the floor. So my first priority is I represent the people of Spokane. My role as helping the floor leader to manage the floor is on behalf of the caucus. And this is the same, Republicans, Democrats, this is the way it works. And so that when it's not even close, that wouldn't happen. And here's the example. In 2037, the floor leader, who's responsible for actually bringing it to the floor, was a no on that bill. If it was up to him, that bill doesn't come to the floor. But because in that capacity, he is serving the caucus, he's going to abide by the caucus rules, again, that every caucus has, Republican and Democrat. And so he did bring that bill to the floor because that was the will of the caucus to bring it to the floor, and according to the rules that have been set up. So in a case like this, no, and let me just tell you why I think I voted for it when it came through, when it did come to the floor, but I'll tell you, and law enforcement will echo this, pursuits are very dangerous. And that is why a number of members were concerned about it. And the other thing, almost everything else that I listed as those priorities was sort of uniformly listed as, we have to get this done. And that's why I think there were a lot of members from probably some from a number of districts who said, look, I'm not going to vote for that 2037, but I really want it to come to the floor. The pursuits, that was not sort of unanimous. And so I don't think that the members in some of those areas were getting the same pressure on that bill. And so that may be why, but I don't want to speak for the people in that case. But I think the fact that the pursuits are so dangerous, it's so well known, that was one of the reasons that people were hesitant on.
And I guess, and I was in communication that day with the chief of police here in Spokane, and I'd been in communication that week with the sheriff. And I'm telling you what, your constituents wanted it. I mean, and I've been in communication with you, and we wanted it. And this is where I guess the frustration, disappointment is do you represent us or do you represent the West Side? And the 2 articles that I shared with you, I can show you exactly how the impact on public safety and the community's health were impacted because of this pursued. The community, in one case, it's a fatality. It was a nonviolent crime this guy created. He goes up and does another crime by breaking into a house. That would have been stopped. They would have pursued him and got him. And I don't want to debate it. And I guess there's, the stories on that. I want to keep it going, but I just want to share.
Chud, can I just respond to the thing you said? You asked, do I represent Spokane or the West Side? Chud, I think I have shown over the 12 years I represent Spokane. I have gone to bat for Spokane at every chance. And in this case, you know what? I actually have gotten more emails from constituents on the other side on some of these bills, but I actually did vote for 5919. So yes, I represent Spokane, and yes, I voted for 5919. But when it comes to a bill coming to the floor, there is a procedure and a set of rules that actually determine what comes to the floor, which you know perfectly well from working for Congresswoman McMorris Rogers. And it's the same exact situation, except actually easier to get a bill to the floor.
Well, let's don't talk about Kathy.
I really take offense to you even asking that question when you look at everything that's happened over the last 12 years and the dialogue that you and I have, the open door that I have, and to take all of that input and to listen. And so even the way you phrase that question is actually quite offensive to me, Chud.
Well, I disagree. And I know the chief of police was in communication with you, as was Ozzy, on that. I want to keep things moving. Let's tie this what's going on and what we see on the streets right now. Do you think this would be to both of you, do you think the violence we are witnessing in Spokane can be connected to the legislation from July, that was the laws that went into place in July 2021? So Representative Graham, do you believe that what we're seeing on the streets right now is connected to the law enforcement reform that went into law in July?
Absolutely. Absolutely, without question. And again, I'm going to point to that article from Representative Harris Talley, that if there's any doubt at all why 5919 did not come to the floor, all you have to do is read that article. This is my 4th session now, and if there is a bill that the Democrat Party wanted to come to the floor, it came to the floor. This, by far and large, with the amount of crime and destruction and death that we're seeing, I personally cannot think of another piece of legislation that we passed that was more important than this. This should have been number 1, because if you don't have safety, you don't have a lot of other things. And safe and clean neighborhoods should be our first and foremost priority.
Okay, thank you. And Senator, to connect it to the laws that went into place in 2021, do you feel that what we're seeing on the streets now are connected to that?
Yeah, the predominant, what we're seeing, what the data that you shared and that I shared, with I think the biggest uptick that we're seeing and the biggest concern that we're seeing there is the increase in property crimes in several areas of the city, but particularly downtown. So I think that there are a lot of things going on. The increase in fentanyl, the COVID pandemic, which has reduced the jail population. I was talking with Chief Vital last week or 2 weeks ago when we met, and he talked about how there are fewer people are staying in jail after they get arrested because of the COVID capacity in the jail. So I think there's a number of things going on. And I think the Blake decision by the Supreme Court is having some impact because, everybody, House, Senate, Republicans and Democrats, maybe not 100%, but there was a very big bipartisan, bicameral consensus that, drug possession fueled by addiction is a health problem. Addiction is a health issue, and that we should address it as a health issue. Now, we also have to use the criminal justice system as a part of that. So what we did is took an approach to say we're going to take a public health approach, but because of the time constraints, we didn't get the health part in line. It's still coming online now. So I think that the fact that the Blake decision happened and that we did the right thing to do a public health approach, but didn't have the public health resources in place fast enough, yes, I think that is fueling, that is a contributor along with fentanyl and the reduced jail population.
Okay. And along the Blake decision, this is from Sulani Matson. And this is her question she had with an individual. When asking a man working his way out of addiction and homelessness what needed to happen to improve things, he replied, quote, "How soon can they make drug possession illegal again?" Unquote. Many other addicts I've talked with over the last 20 years have said it was the court system that brought them into their senses. Is this being discussed as a strategy in the legislature by both caucuses?
So yes, and there was a question in the chat where it said we should have just added knowingly back to the statute, and we did. So knowingly went back into the statute. That was part of that bill that passed. But what we did is to say we want to first do referrals to treatment, and then there would be the criminal justice consequences. But the systems weren't in place, and so I don't think it's worked as well as I would have liked it to work. And so I think that is something that needs to improve. It's part of the reason we put the 2-year sunset into it. So in terms of what's being discussed, everything's being discussed. But I really want to get the recommendations from the experts. So I was the expert in K-12. I spent a year in the weeds and the details and helped make that recommendation. Right now, we have substance abuse, law enforcement experts and legislators who do this expertly that are going to come back with recommendations. Everything's on the table for that. I'm going to evaluate those. I'm going to take those back to our local law enforcement, to our local substance abuse people, to the local communities, and say, what do you think about this? Get their input on those recommendations. And then that's what I'll be looking to push for in the next legislative session.
Representative.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, and again, being very respectful, this issue for some individuals can absolutely be a health issue. However, once they step over that line and they start committing crimes, it's no longer a health issue. I'm guaranteeing you that the people that are on the receiving end of being assaulted, robbed, raped, murdered, they consider that to be a crime issue, where they're the ones that are left holding the bag in this justice system. And that has got to change. We have a situation happening right now, and it was the state Supreme Court that stepped in and made this decision. And when they did that, our caucus, we came up with 5 different bills. Then not this session, the last one before when this came out. And so we were talking about the fentanyl. So my bill of one of the 5 was House Bill 1561, which would expand offenses and penalties for manufacture, sale, distribution, and other conduct involving controlled substances and counterfeit substances. Would have been a mandatory term of 7 years. So the drugs are connected to the crime, and at a time when we have for people between 14 to 48, this is the #1 cause of death right now. The #1 cause. How many more family members do our community have to lose before we start seeing this for the emergency that it is? And the people that are bringing this poison here, that are making money off of preying on and victimizing our families, they're walking away scot-free. This is a criminal's paradise in Washington State. And I'm not saying that some of the individuals that make bad decisions that we can't be looking at rehabilitation for them, but they have to have some skin in the game. They have to keep up their end of the bargain. And part of that is when you get out, you don't continue to make more victims. And if for whatever reason you can't decide not to do that, then you need to be managed, because the people that are in our neighborhoods and businesses and communities have a right to be safe. And if somebody is continually committing these crimes, and they were talking about this, there was a public safety meeting that I was in today, where they were talking about 5% of the population committing 50% of the crimes, and they continually keep getting let out. You know, how many times do we say, you know, that it's okay for you to affect, destroy, or end people's lives before we say, okay, enough's enough, you're not keeping up your end of the bargain, and we have to manage you. I think that's fair, and that's what I'm hearing in our community, is that we want balance, we want to help the ones that we can, but we also need to hold the ones that we can't accountable and not allow them to continue in this dangerous, deadly behavior.
Okay, thank you. And we're right at 2 o'clock. I want to close with a question from Darren Watkins, and I think there's a lot of passion around this just because of the heightened perception of public safety, and I think perception is a reality in this case, but I hear more and more. I do work downtown, and I hear more and more that people don't want to come downtown because they don't feel safe. So Darren's question is this: what should we be focused on moving forward as a group? How do we communicate with you, Senator, Representative? What do we do? Because I'm hearing a lot from a lot just because of the role I played over the last year and a half. And there's not anything I can do. I'm not in an elected position. I can just share. I can try to coach or advocate. But what would you each recommend that we do to be able to try to bring public safety back into a place where we feel safe to have our sons, grandsons, granddaughters, come downtown?
I'll defer to Representative Graham to go first.
Okay, so, and again, with the meetings and stuff that I have been attending, is we have to be able to have honest conversations first and foremost, or you're not going to see any sort of improvement, and things can absolutely get worse, which is horrible to think about. And we have a choice. We're either going to start facing these things head on, and I can give you one example. There's more. Let's take the ankle bracelets, that there's been a real push not to incarcerate, but to go to these ankle bracelets instead. And those would be a lot more effective if they were actually being monitored. See, there's a lot of people have the misconception that because that ankle bracelet is on, is that they are being actively monitored, and that's not the case. They were talking about somebody that had one of the monitors on that stole 10 cars while he had it on, because they're not monitoring these real time. There should be some sort of an alarm if they go outside of the area they're supposed to be in. And another thing is the programs. Once they come out and they have these monitors on, what are they doing while they're there? Are they participating in any programs? So if we're talking about restorative justice and helping people get on their feet, that should also include our community, and it should also include crime victims. That this can't be just restorative justice for the criminals continually, all of the resources going there without a lot of the accountability. And when we look at rehabilitation, does that mean that the person really regrets what they've done and they have participated that way? Or is it just that they've served time and they've checked off the boxes? And there is no requirement to really be sorry or understand how they have affected those families. So there's a lot of things that we can be doing. And there's just not enough time. Maybe we can have another meeting where we can talk about some of these solutions, which we have great answers.
I would welcome that, the town hall type, if either of you wanted to lead it and I can rally. So I appreciate that. Senator, thoughts or suggestions for us?
Yeah, thank you, Judd, and Darren. Thanks for that positive question to end on. How can we be productive moving forward? I think a couple things. One, I think you have to recognize that everyone, at least everyone I've worked with on this on all sides, want at a high level the same thing. They want our city to be safe. They want our city to be prosperous, and they want everybody to do well in our city. And that's, I think that's shared. That's certainly my goal. I think that's the goal of most of the people on this call that I've talked with, and it's the goal of all the elected leaders. So I think recognizing that even though you may have different views on some of the details of how to get there, to recognize and acknowledge that everybody wants the same thing, which is a safe and prosperous city. The next thing I would say is, in that regard, is about reaching out to try to be inclusive and collaborate and understand some of those ways in which your views may be different, because we're not going to get there by calling people out, by drawing lines in the sand, by saying it's my way or the highway. It's the only way. It's one of the reasons I appreciate that you have varying views on these calls, so that you're doing just that, to hear a variety of views. And I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to do that on a one-on-one basis as well, because the only way we're going to get a consensus is if we have a little give and understand and kind of come to these ideas together, rather than if everybody says this is the way and it's the only way, we'll never get there, because we're going to have everybody in different factions. So we've got to try to come together that way. And then in terms of how to communicate, I read every email that comes in. As almost everybody on this call knows, I respond to your emails. I prioritize constituents, but I respond generally to everybody. And I just urge you to stay in touch, not just with me, but with Representative Graham, all of the electeds. But please, please take that time to take a step back and try to see it from somebody else's view, so we can get to that common ground in between. This is a time where we can make change. We're going to have another big session in 2023, certainly related to the Blake issue, but we're going to have ongoing issues related to all of the stuff we care about in housing and mental health and education. And we're all trying for the same thing, which is a safe and prosperous community. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you both. I'm hoping both of you would be open. Obviously, Senator just said it, that he emails right back, and emails in the middle of the night too. I've gotten emails at all times from him, and so I know he communicates. So there are a lot of questions in chat. Well, he didn't even get through a tenth of them. So if you had one that wasn't answered, I would encourage you to follow up with either Representative Graham or Senator Billig. So thank you both. I want to remind May 6th, we're going to do the same time, 1 p.m. with Chief Meidel, and he will be presenting. And then Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich, I'm hoping to be able to coordinate with as well. So I'll leave it there. I want to close this out. I hope you go and have a great weekend. But again, to both of you for representing us, thank you. Thanks for listening. I know it can get emotional, Senator. We go back and forth occasionally, but that's how, I want to be here too as a resource. If you ever want to know like what's going on the ground or what I'm dealing with 22 of Hutton's properties and property crimes that we're dealing with, I'm more than happy to share, as you know. But thank you both. I do want to leave this open. There is a reporter, maybe two reporters on here, and it wasn't necessarily they want to follow up with the business owners as if there's any issues or concerns they have from their side and the impact they have on property crime with their businesses. So I would, drop off if you feel so. If you want to stay on, I think it's Malia from CREM. If you're on, we can have you unmuted, and if you wanted to ask any questions, and I'm sure you would get some feedback from some of the members in here. So thank you. Have a great day. If you want to stay on, please do. Otherwise, enjoy the weekend.
Thank you. I am here, and I would love to speak with a business owner just to see, what are they seeing as far as crime? What are you guys seeing around your business? Is it good? Is it bad? What solutions would you like to see?
We will take volunteers. I know Sheldon Jackson never hurts for words. He would share. I don't know if he's still on. Sheldon, are you on? I would welcome anybody that would like to speak out. I definitely can share my issues, Malia, and I'd prefer to do it probably one-on-one with you.
Sure.
Hey, I'll jump in. You may not think of me as a business owner, but we have a car lot out on East Sprague, and catalytic converters go out of there all the time. In fact, I wanted to ask the senator, maybe Jenny, you could tell me, what was the law that was passed to help cut down on that theft? It seems to me ridiculous that there's places that are buying those. They're just welcoming theft. So I can speak to that. Car theft has been on the rise. Guys get arrested. The same guys are back robbing our lot again, stealing stuff. It's just one small area.
Okay, so I can answer that question. The bill was aimed at if somebody cuts those catalytic converter out, obviously it's cut. And so the idea behind that bill was to make it harder for the people that are committing these crimes to benefit from selling those products. Now, I will also admit that yes, that bill will make it more difficult for them, but it's not going to stop the theft, because they can go to Idaho, they can go to California, they can go to Oregon, so they can put a you know, a truckload of these things, you know, in a trailer of some sort and haul them over and sell them there. Really, honestly, the best answer that I see for this is, if you don't want the theft, you have to start prosecuting these crimes. Whatever you tolerate, you're going to get more of. Whatever is emboldened and enabled and rewarded, you're going to get more of. So we have to get serious. You know, theft is not a victimless crime. It's not. And there are plenty of jobs out there. We have plenty of money going into programs. The problem is they can just walk right out again. So that is something that we have to deal with. And we are putting together legislation during the interim, and I'm looking forward to next session to really bring up these problems to deal with them.
Great. I see Len Yergelet on here. He has been in the heart of it for a while. I don't know, Len, if you would like to say a few comments on the impacts you've seen with your property, which is right there on Brown and Pacific. Len, are you still on?
Can I ask a follow-up question to Phil?
Sure.
Phil, can you know, I am interested in your story. Can you just in a couple of sentences tell me a little bit about what you've been seeing as far as theft? And can you also tell me a little bit about your business, the name and everything?
Well, Union Gospel Mission takes in donated cars, boats, motorcycles, you name it. We've had people bust out our showroom windows, take motorcycles. We have a constant problem with people breaking into cars, stealing parts, catalytic converters being cut. It's just an ongoing process that we've dealt with. And one of the criminals was just on the other side of the fence between us and the railroad tracks. They get arrested. How soon are they released? They're back. I mean, I think we've heard that story over and over. In fact, I'd like someone to echo that. What was the gentleman arrested 75 times? My guess is there's only a handful of people that are breaking out windows in Spokane. And I would love to hear a statistic on the number of windows that are broken out each day. And it's probably just a handful of the same people doing it over and over again. And so, hey, Chud, while I have the floor, homelessness is a hot issue. It goes before city council and this whole new shelter we're opening. And I'll guarantee you who will be at City Hall Monday night is all the homeless advocates speaking out on why they don't want this large shelter so laws can be enforced. I would love to see this business community show up and say, you know what, we're affected, and fill the City Hall, the foyer and everywhere else, because the only ones that show up are the advocates. And I'm just saying it's time for the business taxpayers to show up and say, we're tired of spending money cleaning up camps. We're tired of seeing crime go up. And we want to provide a safe community where there's a bed for people to sleep in, a bathroom for them to use, a hot shower, sit at a table and eat with dignity. And that's what this offers. And there is no reason to have this discussion. So anyway, I'd love to see so many people, they can't even get into City Hall, and it's just not advocates. Sorry, I got carried away. Thanks.
You're good at that though, Phil. Amen. I appreciate you sharing that.
So can we
yep.
talk off camera, or can we talk, can you provide like a phone number that I can just give you a call in a couple minutes to chat with you privately?
Phil, shoot me your, I'll send Malia your cell phone. Are you okay with that? Oh, you're on mute. I'll
yeah,
connect,
that's great. Thanks, Judd.
I'll connect the two of you, Malia.
Okay,
Are you good with one more? I know Len's on here. Len has some property. He owns property right down on Pacific and Brown.
sure.
Yeah, hi, Chud. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can, Len. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, and excuse the background. I'm on a job site painting today. So anyways, yeah, I've been on I'm on Brown Street, across the street from House of Charity. I've been there for 18 years now, since 2004. I've seen a lot of change here in the last several years in Spokane. And I would say things started getting really bad about 3 years ago. And a lot of people like to blame it on COVID, but as most of us know, that started about 2 years ago. And for about a year prior to COVID, there was a lot of people camping underneath the Brown Street Bridge. And with people that camp in the area, there's problems that come with it. There is a huge amount of trash. There is many needles. A lot of people use the outside areas and sidewalks and entryways for their bathrooms. There are drug dealers that come into town when the business people leave. So I see it in the evenings where after 5 o'clock, cars start parking on the street and people come out from underneath the bridge and walk over to the cars. They have a transaction, they go back under the bridge and they'll shoot up in broad daylight. You can walk by them and watch them with needles in their arms. And there are no consequences for their actions. And when there's no consequences, that's when we have the problems. There is a lot of crime in the area. There's a lot of vandalism, a lot more gang tags. And I think that's probably gangs marking their territory for where they'll be for selling their drugs, so that those that are the vagrants living on the sidewalks know where to find them. So one thing I did notice, for one thing, I had to get away this winter. I left for 3 months looking for other cities because Spokane, which I used to love, I now hate. And considering selling my property and getting out of here before it gets worse. But I went away for 3 months, but I did come back and find that under the Brown Street Viaduct, the city had put chain link fencing. There's currently no campers. Nobody has defecated on my doorstep since then. There's very little garbage. I'm picking up very few needles. So it just shows that wherever we're allowing people to live on the streets, the problems come with it. And if there's no consequences, then why should they change their actions? So if you have any questions, let me know. But that's just kind of what I've been witnessing here in the last couple of years.
And yes, I'd like to also connect with Len.
Okay, I will connect the two of you.
Thank you.
Hey,
And-
Chad,
Yes,
do you want me to give a perspective from the managing the Kohl's properties downtown?
yes, please do, Kyle.
So we've seen, I came up here from Portland about 3.5 years ago. And so I was used to obviously a lot more people, very high pace over there. When I was coming over here, I felt like, although a lot of people that I talked to in the area said that there was a lot of activity, I felt like it was, tremendously better than Portland. But at the time, we actually had the LCO program with our public safety. And the one benefit, I guess, that we do have for our properties downtown that a lot of other people don't have the benefit is we pay a lot of money each year for our security staff. And at the time, like I said, we had the LCO programs, which limited commission with the Spokane Police Department, and we were able to arrest up to misdemeanors at the time. So when things were impacting our retail downtown, we were able to take care of it right on the spot. As we know, recently we lost the LCO program. Since that point, we've seen probably about 40 to 50% uptick in the amount of vagrants that we approach. Amongst those, ones that have turned argumentative or violent to our security team downtown has also risen quite a bit. So we're getting impacted quite a bit on our retail side, but also on our commercial side. So over specifically at our Spokesman Review building, we had an individual that he was obviously monitoring our security staff very closely. As soon as they stepped away, within 2 minutes, somebody got inside, went down in the basement and tried setting up shop in a back little room area. So after we went through cameras, we found out he was actually in the building for about 2 days hiding out down there. So we noticed stuff was being stolen from around the property. So he was coming out at night and going into offices. When he was finally arrested, it was a very short trip for him and he was right back in. In fact, he tried to regain entry back into our building within about 2 days of being released. So my public safety manager's on here. I don't know if he dropped off or not. He would definitely have another first person, way of talking about, how he's been impacted. So.
Thanks, Kyle.
Chud,
Yeah, Jack.
I just would ask, similar experiences for us, not only at the bank and our buildings downtown, but I have the city ramp garage, had a window shut out this week. The Pizza Hut on 3rd, a tire thrown through the window, the firehouse tagged. I mean, the Buffalo building window broken, tagged. I mean, it's really tough. And I think what I'd like to see, I think there's a good discussion today, but really to figure out where we agree and where we disagree on things and really kind of hash this throughout around accountability, around the city court, around we have the progress being made with the camp, around social services. I mean, there's a wide breadth of this, and I know Hello Good is doing a lot of work around this, and I appreciate your work as well. But, Andy, it'd be great to sit down and really go through these things and kind of sketch it out and find out where we all sit on the map, so to speak, on our perspective, and find out those things we can agree on more quickly and get to the end of the day, because it is unsafe and it's not palatable for us downtown right now.
Thanks for sharing, Jack. Malia, that was Jack Heath. He's the president and CEO of Washington Trust Bank. And then I think I saw the River Park Square. Jim, are you with River Park Square?
How you doing, Chud? Yeah, I'm River Park Square's public safety manager. Just following on with what some of the stuff that Kyle was speaking of, my officers have really been put through the ringer the past several months that we've lost our limited commission. It's almost as if the criminal element downtown have caught wind of this and have been trying to take advantage of it. Our theft has risen. I just recovered about $900 worth of stolen merchandise this afternoon. That was taken this morning, and I recovered it this afternoon. And that's pretty much a daily basis with at least 3 of our stores on the block. And then the violence that these transients are showing is a complete disregard for any type of safety or security or authority. And the drug use is pretty rampant as well. I track all of that, and the increase in it is really, or increase with it is really exponential.
And as we all know, River Park Square is key to the heart of Spokane. So thank you for sharing. Malia, do you have any other questions or anyone else wants to share?
Chud, this is Tom Konis. If I could jump in, I'd appreciate it. Is that all right?
Go for it.
Yeah, as the Spokane County Assessor, I can tell you that our commercial appraisers, especially along the railroad viaduct area, especially, have lowered values, which therefore affects the rest of the taxpayers in Spokane County, because they've got to make up the difference that these commercial properties have dropped in value. And we are now seeing it also along the Camp Hope area, that we're lowering the values of those residential properties along there. I just really think that the citizens need to pay attention to this. This is a very important issue, and it's going to affect their pocketbook.
And Tom, maybe we can connect as well and talk.
Absolutely, anytime.
Okay. Because I think this is something that we could pursue in a more in-depth story.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, Chud, it's Micah.
Hey, Micah.
Can you hear me? I
Yes.
just want to talk from our perspective. You know, we've been in downtown Spokane since the early 1900s. And we're in the process of trying to sell our building. And I can tell you from the activity that we have that Spokane is still a really strong and desirable community for people to be trying to move into, particularly the downtown area. But I mean, in terms of having to manage the property over the last several years, we've had to plywood over shipping dock doors because we had people living in them. We are also seeing garbage, feces, needles, bottles, all of those things. And the increase in that in the last 5 years has been substantial. So I will say the interest is still there in downtown Spokane, but the criminal activity, you know, we've had broken windows, our doors were shattered, our outer doors were shattered twice in 2020 surrounding the Poop Fest weekend. We also have bullet holes in a couple of our windows and some other things. They're double windowed, so they aren't all the way through to the building. But, you know, we have a constant presence down there because the building is currently vacant. And I'm determined to make sure that people aren't trying to get in and set up shop in there while we're trying to sell. So just anything that we can do to improve the situation in downtown, you know, is however we can help with that from a business and ownership responsibility. I'm here to help and volunteer. So
Thanks for sharing, Malia. Mike Dunlap is a Jensen with Jensen Bird, and Jensen Bird building is one of the, you know, it's one of the older buildings downtown and right in the heart of the U District. Well, that, any follow-up, Malia?
Yes, hello. Yes, no, thank you. I appreciate everyone that who have shared their stories. And Chud, if you could just forward their information and I can just touch base with them after this meeting and kind of see if we could do one-on-one and go a little bit more in depth. Thank you.
Are you okay with that, Tom? Okay. And Mike,
Glenn would be great. And
bet.
I think let's see. Jack would be another person I'd like to speak with.
okay. I will send you their contact information,
Thank you
Leah.
so much. I appreciate it. Thank you
Yeah.
everyone for your time.
Happy Easter weekend. I do appreciate all those staying on. It's almost 2:30, so that's an hour and a half. Thank you very much, Malia. Thank you for staying around too, and Representative Graham for staying on. Appreciate it. We got work to do. I see Tom Solberg. You have your thumb up. I'll give you one more if you have something. Oh, thumb up for.
Just thanks, Chud.
God, thank you. All right, I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll keep plugging away. Hopefully see you on May 6th. I think Chief Midles will be good. He's frustrated. I'll just say that. Thank you very much.